Hi, and thanks for watching today. You are watching the Upright Uptake. Today, we're going to be talking about finding your company's voice and in any communications materials, any press releases, bylines, blog posts, social media posts. How do you capture an executive or a company's special voice on an industry, on a topic, on an issue? And I'm proud, as always, to have Janie with me here today. Janie, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited about talking about this one today because it's it's a bit ethereal. One of the things we always try to do early on when working with a client is what's their voice? What do they want to say? How do they want to say it? Who are they going to say it to? It's part of messaging, but it's also bigger. We want to capture, in a sentence, in a paragraph, in 300 words, in 150 characters. We're trying to capture what a company or an exec is going to say in a way that resonates with its audience. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. I think that the tone of voice involves a lot of different things. It can be the vocabulary that you can use. It can be the syntax, the point of view you take it from, style. Is it conversational? Is it short and simple? Is it long and complex? But I think every company needs to be unique in the way that they find their voice. And so that's what we need to consider when we have a new client or a client maybe that's doing a rebrand or reevaluating their voice. What does that need to sound like? And there's a lot of things to consider when you're making those decisions.
Absolutely. And I'm going to splash some cold water on this because this is probably an area of frustration for a lot of agencies, for people that write, because writing is so subjective. And one of the things we try to counsel people when we first start working with an organization is our goal is to always try to mimic or get the company's voice or the executive's voice right early on. But it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes collaboration. One of the toughest pieces of criticism, I've always gotten over the years, and I stopped taking it personally, but deep down I still take it personally when a client comes back to us and says, "Oh, the writing's not good," or "This isn't right." Especially in the early days, it's not going to be right in the first draft of some of the first things we write. It's that dance. Right? We always talk about the dancing partner or dating. You're going to put your foot in your mouth the first time you sit down with somebody. Same goes for writing. And when you write something, you're not going to get it right on the first try. But by God, we're trying.
We are. And I think when you say somebody comes back to you and says, this isn't right, the questions have to come into play. So why isn't this right? Is it the audience? Are we not communicating in a way that the audience needs to hear it? Have they thought about who the audience is? Because it can be very different if you're doing internal communications for, say, your employees as a whole workforce, or executive communications for the board. Those are two different things, and certainly very different than if you're doing a piece where you want it to be more of a marketing sales piece, maybe a blog post reaching out to a specific vertical or someone with a specific title that you want to buy your product. So it's so different across the board. So when somebody just says this isn't right, it's always like, well, why what let's look at this. What are we missing here? Consistency. Is it consistent between different audiences? That's difficult, because if you're writing internally, it's very different, and you still have to have that brand voice, that consistency, that sound, that flavor that is your organization and your expert. So it is tricky. It's definitely tricky. And then goals. Why are you writing this piece in the first place? What do you hope to get from it? And those are all the things that we are going to ask. Those are the things we hope you've thought about if you're a client. And then we got to figure it out from there. So I think it'd be maybe helpful to talk a little bit about what our process is.
Yeah, and definitely. And there's a nuance to this, and we're going to kind of go into that because what you're trying to come across changes from audience to audience. What a company says in a B2B publication is different than what you say in a B2C publication. And of course, as always, when talking to reporters, it goes back to, I think, uptake number one. It's not always about you. It's about what you bring to the issue or what you bring to the conversation. That's why we work so hard to get that voice right, so that what you say doesn't come across as hard sell or isolated in just like this narrow focus of we're trying to sell product or platform or service. We're trying to show that you as a company, you as an executive, have your head screwed on right, and you're providing insight and value and depth to a conversation.
I love those words, insight, value, and depth, because the biggest complaints that I always hear from a communication perspective overall across the board is this doesn't mean anything to me. This doesn't speak to me. This isn't relevant for me. So when you're writing a piece, I think that's probably the most important thing you can do, is say, how do I make this relevant for the audience? Why do they want to read it? And that's number one. One of the things I love that we do is we record people. So if we have a subject matter expert or someone who is an influencer, or if the material is super complex, it's great to actually hop on a Zoom call, hit the record button, and then we can hear in your voice exactly how you want it said. And we can start there and write from there and then fine tune that. So that's one of the favorite things that I do. The other thing is looking at podcasts or interviews that perhaps the subject matter expert has already done, and using some of that voice, that material, to help really capture that sound and those words and the style.
And I think one of the things that we like doing, and we've said this before, is we try not to create more work for our clients. So that method of recording and listening to past interviews and things is our way of reducing that. One of the things we often do is, we can craft a media response or something. So just put the bullets down, and we'll flesh it out in your voice, in the appropriate tone for the audience. And one of the things we find in the review process is it's always good to put at the top of the document or mention on the call, this is the audience we've written this for. Because if we've written something and the feedback is, you know what, this is too high level or too basic, guess what? That's what TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal might be looking for. They're not looking for in the weeds, nitty gritty about the inner workings of a device or a platform. They're looking for general trends. So we'll write to that brief. But again, when you're writing a white paper or something for a deep trade publication, that's when you can let your freak flag fly in terms of depth and geekitude and showing off all your technical ability on a piece.
Exactly right. The other thing to think about is your competition too. So when you're writing something, your competition's probably also been in the same publications. They probably talked about similar, possibly even the same topic, and you don't want to sound like them. So you have to be careful how you sound, so that you sound like you and not copying somebody else. And so that's something that we look at. We look at, what have your competitors written? What's been published out there that your competitors are being quoted on? And how can we complement that and make it unique for your business? And that can be tricky, because sometimes the competitors do it really well, and it's so tempting to want to copy what they do. And we just say, don't do that.
At this point, I want to talk a little bit about sort of first drafts. When we write something, once we know what we're writing, who's it for, who's saying it, very often, and this has come out of my experience over the years. And I think, Janie, you're the same way. You're more refined than I am. But I sort of liken it to music. Let's just get the drum beat down. Let's just get the basics down, and we can refine it. So very often you'll see a first draft has typos, has stuff in margins. Can we say this? Or where can we go for third party endorsements? I'm trying to just sort of lay down the general narrative and making sure we get that stuff in. And then we can build it. It's like making music. It's like building a model airplane. You sort of get the pieces together, and then you build onto it. So, our first drafts, they have a lot of questions in them. They have a lot of sort of nebulousness into it. Then we can refine it. And if we've been capturing that voice for a long time, uh, it's less nebulous. It's more specific and closer to the final version. But early versions are just that. Early versions where we're just trying to make sure the foundation's there, make sure the basic building blocks are present. Then we'll move them around in place, and we'll nail them down.
Yeah, yeah, we'll miss the mark a lot of times on the very first draft, and that's normal. It's that crawl, walk, run kind of thing. When we're just meeting a client, we're writing for the first time, we're talking about a topic that we may be just learning about. Maybe we haven't had that recorded interview yet, especially if we haven't done that. We do our best, but we expect feedback and we expect edits. And so that's one of the things I would say to clients is don't be horrified by it. Be brutally honest about it with us. Tell us where we missed the mark. Tell us what needs to be different. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. And then we can take it from there. And over time, those drafts are going to get better and better and better. So the first draft might actually just have a few edits in it and not, the horrifying column of comments. But that's okay, and that's why you have to start somewhere. And exactly, we have to build that foundation before we can run and build the whole building and put all the pieces together. And we never take it personally. I think both you and I, Paul, have been in this business long enough, written enough stuff that, people are going to tell us, yeah, that's great, or that's terrible. And that's okay. We want you
Yeah.
to be honest and tell us that. And then when we go back and we rewrite it, which is the next step, now hopefully we have the feedback that we need so that what we produce is what you want. And our goal is to have happy clients and have very effective communications for them. And I would say 99% of the time that happens. Every once in a while, though, we'll get a client that just is never happy with anything that gets written. And so I always like to talk about analysis paralysis when we're writing something, because I've actually had, it was a boss years ago who literally I had 17 drafts of, it was maybe a 3-paragraph thing. And at the end of the 17th version, every version had to be saved with a V and the number. That's why I know there was a 17. He says to me, bring me back that first thing that you wrote. And we started over again. And it was like, I would say, keep in mind 2 things. If you're carving it in stone, it better be perfect, because it's going to be harder to get it fixed. If you're printing it, man, take your time, proofread, rewrite, edit, hire a second set of eyes, third set of eyes, those sorts of things. Once it's printed and published, it's harder to change. If it's a web page or a blog post, you can change it. So I always say, how difficult is it to change? Who is the audience? How important is the piece? And don't get stuck in analysis paralysis for something like a blog post or even a social media post or even a press release. You want to make sure all the information's accurate, the quotes are approved, all of that, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. But if you say one word versus another, struggling, going back and forth, pick the right word that feels best and go with it. So, know when to stop editing, and progress versus perfection is something to think about.
One of my favorite quotes is "Perfection is the enemy of progress." But to that end, I had a colleague, a client I worked with who used to say famously, and this was in context of profit and loss. And he said, I'm not. He said he was allergic to red ink, and I like to sort of say the opposite of it. We're not allergic to red ink when it comes to correcting and making something right. I'll often say when I send the first draft to a client, I'm like, take the red pen out, bring it out there, write it up. And there are times where we're not even close, and I'm inclined to say that's not the fault of anybody. It's just the learning process. We're trying to find that voice and trying to get it right. And, the closer and the more we collaborate, the more we work, that distance is going to be narrowed. But there are still occasions where, you know, the company voice is important in certain things. And I'm going to give you an example. This is not about the creative process. This is more PR strategy. We had a client a few years ago during the Black Lives Matter protests, where they actually said, we want to put out a statement in support of Black Lives Matter and what's going on. And I counseled them against it because it wasn't consistent with their voice, and it also invited some criticism. They didn't have any people of color on their board or senior management. I was like, this isn't your lane. Don't, stay where your comfort zone is, stay where you can speak with authority. If you can't speak with authority on a subject, don't talk about it. Hey, rewind, go back to our media training video where we say, don't answer questions you're not comfortable with. Don't talk about something you're not comfortable with, or you can't hand on heart say you're doing the best a company or an executive can do.
Especially political stuff. I
Yes.
would, unless you're politically driven or your clients, that's something is very, very important to them. I would say just steer clear of that and focus on what you do best, what you're good at, and that message that you want people to hear about your company, and be very, very careful and tread lightly when it's outside your area of expertise.
Yeah,
Right.
and not every company can be like Oreo cookies on social media. You're not the wacky, fun-loving, full-spirited voice. If you haven't been, if you're like, who's a great example of
It's like a
somebody.
cybersecurity company trying to be like Oreos on social
Yeah,
media.
or yeah, you don't see BlackRock like, putting pithy things on social media. They're like, straight, tight
Yep.
knit, everything buttoned up, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that.
And sometimes we have clients where it might not normally make sense, but it did. In this case, we had a cybersecurity company who had a Ukrainian employee, and they wanted to talk about the experience of that Ukrainian employee, and how they were able to immigrate to uh, North America and escape the war and what they went through. And so that's okay because that related specifically to that company's situation. So we didn't discourage that. We allowed that to happen, but it wasn't a key message either. It was interesting. We put it out there, and internally, I think it got some buzz and within their own blog and everything, but it never got picked up because there was so much of that already in the media that theirs wasn't unique. And it
Yeah.
was sad that it wasn't unique, but nonetheless, it didn't get garner news. So if you're looking for news, I think you have to be very careful where you tread.
Actually, I think that's a nice place to kind of bring it back full circle, because part of all of this is not just finding your voice or finding your company's voice, is recognizing that that voice will evolve over time. Like I said, cybersecurity and issues related to Ukraine, not an obvious fit, but when that company has a reason to talk about it and they can talk about it from that point onward, that's great. That makes sense. That's a logical evolutionary step. And that's sort of where we try to bring freshness into a narrative, or when we start with a company, we always try to find what are the little nuggets of interesting things that may not be, relevant, seemingly relevant. One of the things I always like to go back to is, we learned on a client intake that one of our clients had three people who, were small brewers, small craft brewers. And it's like, well, that's kind of weird, but let's figure out how to weave that into the mix. So, that's sort of a personal interest, or a human interest story that we can bring in. So all these things sort of add up to what a company's voice is, who they are, their personality. And if you're working with a good agency, they're going to pick up on the nuances that you might not know about, or you might not think about, because you're too focused on the day to day and on getting coverage or talking about this topic. And we discover there's someone in your office that likes talking about horticulture, and there's a link between cybersecurity and horticulture that we can play with. So with that, I think we're close to, sort of bringing this one home. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jane?
I would just say patience, and talk to your PR team and your communications team, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to get the red pen out. But keep that in mind, that progress and perfection are not necessarily hand in hand partners. So know when to stop editing and let go. Trust your PR. I think we talked a lot about trust in some of our former uptakes, and it's important that that when we start saying, well, for TechCrunch or for this magazine or that magazine, we need to simplify this, or it's too detailed, or it's not detailed enough, and trust us there and help us to find your voice. And I think when we work together, we end up with better results always. So communicate with us, ask us questions. And if you're watching this and you're like, gosh, I'm trying to figure out my company's voice, and it would be great to have a PR perspective on that, reach out. You can always reach out to us at uptake@uprightcomms.com. And we are happy to brainstorm with you and explore. So I think that's all I have, Paul.
I'm not going to add to that. Nicely put, Janie. Thank you for watching today. And for more information, Janie's already said the email, uptake@uprightcomms.com, and we'll keep doing more of these and hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks for watching.